If you ever get the chance to get on the road to tour, you'll probably quickly realize the huge gap from the vast majority of people on the internet and what live productions actually do, and see the amount of techniques, tricks, and cheating that internet audio troll purist would have a freak out about that is pretty normal in the pro level touring world is really quite high. From backing tracks to autotune to lip syncing and the like, the reality of amazing performances that have touched millions and may have touched you and me, and the use of cheating techniques is in no way independent and sometimes synonymous. So let's dissect the pro level touring world a bit. Maybe we can find some unique perspectives that can help you and me make better art and performances. So basically all of my touring has been in the rock and metal worlds, both with some new modern bands of the current generation as well as the late 90s and 2000s. The last two tours being headlined by Atreyu and then BABYWOLF. And along the way we played shows with Hinder, Red Jumpsuit Apparatus, POD, Red, Puddle and Mud, and a bunch more. And yet in talking and touring with these bands and the soundmen that mix them, even when some of the acts go for a more perfect hi-fi sound or a bit of a more mushy live old school rock sound, you'll find the use of backing tracks. So if you don't know, a backing track is audio that is played at the same time as the song played, as essentially another instrument, just played by a computer and not by a human. And that mentality is how it's viewed. It's not lesser, it's not stupid, it's just another instrument that generally doesn't have a live performance happening. And out on the road, you'll quickly see that in the end, the audience is there to experience your team give an amazing, engaging, emotion-filled performance. If you look, sound, and feel larger than life, we're there on that stage to make a huge engaging performance for the people that paid to be there and want to be entertained. And you would be blown away to find out how much of live music nowadays is in tracks. Guitar layers, bass layers, drum doubles, and definitely vocals. And it's interesting because you don't really see this talked about very much, almost like it's a secret, despite it being in nearly every live act you'll see. Because when a production is done right, all the instruments blend into a perfect orchestra, basically invisibly. It's like if a meal tastes amazing, you don't really care about trying to figure out if they use Walmart baking soda or not. It should be the summation of the food and the combined flavor, not the individual pieces. So when you see that guitar up there playing a huge crushing tone, is that just him, or is it him layered with another perfect rhythm track? Or is he muted and the whole thing is a track and he's just faking? The real answer is, it doesn't technically matter, at least not to the listener. Because at the pro level, the audience can't tell because it feels real. And that's the only thing that really matters, is what is perceived by the audience. Just like in an audio file, you don't really know if it's 400 or 400 individual elements that make up a sound. It just sounds good and feels good, or doesn't. And at the pro level, live production focuses on the end result, often a bit too much, but it's always driving to that end result and the perception of the audience. If by doing everything the right way, pure way, you make a worse emotional connection with the audience, then we probably failed both on a performance and production level, and defeated the whole purpose of the performance. Now, if this puts a sour taste in your mouth already and makes you say art is dead, believe me, I can understand. And hold on to that feeling, and we're gonna get to that. And also, to be clear, there are a few bands that completely forego this. There are exceptions, especially in older acts that were playing before this tech even really existed. But even then, most of them have switched over to at least some sort of tracks. And obviously a few genres and bands are built on the chaos and intentional imperfection that can come with completely avoiding a computer doing anything. But we're focusing on the majority of acts. And all that being said, the demands of touring often bring out a need for repeatability and consistency that overrides a lot of the desire for that chaos and imperfection. So let's try to go through a few of these ways some of these bands actually use tracks. So first up we have doubled rhythm guitar. So the guitarist is playing his part, but there'll be a studio double of his guitar playing at the exact same time. And on any modern guitar tracked in a studio, virtually everything is double tracked. I mean, two of them are played at exactly the same time, and often quads, sometimes four. So to emulate that live, they'll often have the guitars playing on a quieter version on top of these tracks, which can really add to making that huge, wide, massive sound that you hear in the album. And additionally, with bands with one guitar, they'll use tracks to basically give all the sonic advantages of two guitars. So when he goes and plays his lead part, you don't have to lose the thick rhythm. And you'll often see in that sort of situation, a rhythm track will cut on the parts where he's playing a lead and then cut off when he switches back to rhythm. So it's only there when you need it. More and more bands are completely foregoing a bassist, and with so many of rock and metal's bass parts lately just being the guitar part and knocked it down with minor variation. And just practically it's one less person to pay on the tour. And even musically, modern bass tones are typically extremely and carefully compressed and sidechained to the kick drum, nearly impossible to do live without it causing a lot of potential problems. Because in the studio, it's pretty straightforward to micromanage those tricky low frequencies, but live you don't have that much control. So often even the bass guitar tone that you can get through a track is going to be sonically far superior to what can be made live. And more in current trends, synth-based sounds are being used in songs over a traditional bass guitar anyway. And if you're already switching between a synth and a bass guitar, A lot of these acts are finding it's much easier and practical to just match those two tones and tracks instead of having half the instrument be tracked and half the instrument be live. So they're coming to the conclusion that when it comes to the gain of performance and real playing that can come with having a human instrument, compared to the financial cost and logistical cost, many bands are not even bringing live bassists with them on tour. And on to synthesizers. For some reason, people tend to not have as much of an issue with keyboards and synths being in backing tracks, especially when there's loud guitars and drums blasting. And for many bands, their tracks are even just synths. And even if you have a synth player live, they'll generally just play the parts that deliver the best visual and sonic performance aspects. Because the way they see it is it very exciting to see that keyboard ripping this quiet little background pad that's barely audible? Probably not. They're gonna stick it on track and generally let him play on the parts that are most noticeable to the listener. And realistically, modern rock and metal generally become a small orchestra of bleeps and bloops happening underneath the main instrument, since it's far easier to write and track many synth layers than it has been in decades past. Now, drums are by far the livest instrument, because basically even if you wanted to fully take it out of the mix for some reason, the instrument is inherently really loud. Even in electric, it is far from silent, even when it's muted. There's still a guy up on stage banging on things pretty hard. So when watching a live band, you could question, is that guitar live? Who knows? Is that vocal a track? Who can say? Is that drum kit live? Yeah, that drum kit's live. However, cheat codes will find a way wherever they can, and you'll see far more backing track drums than you might guess. You'll really see a fair amount of hi-hats and random percussion in tracks, and generally they're more clicky and percussive and not so much washy. A good example of this is you can actually see a lot of the actual backing tracks for Linkin Park's music, and you'll see in the backing track for What I've Done, there's a lot of random percussion happening at the same time. So the drummer will play his full part and is accompanied by these percussion instruments playing at the same time. And an additional way you'll see drums appearing in backing track is for having studio reverb, particularly for a snare. Meaning that basically, let's say you had this big booming epic drum part in a bridge, they'll actually put those drum elements as reverb just in the track, but not the drum itself. So basically that snare gets played live, but in those parts where you need that perfect cathedral reverb, without having to deal with all the problems and unpredictability of it live, and they'll put just the reverb of that snare, so they combine together into basically one instrument. Okay, it's time. Let's talk about lip syncing. So we already know at this point that at a pro level, cheating is mostly invisible. You'll never hear about performers who are really good at lip syncing or tracks or using autotune because it kind of defeats the whole purpose. It's like being a famous embezzler. If you're really good at it, then no one knows. And one note on this, and this needs to be clearly stated, and often I think the misunderstanding that comes when people talk about these things is that very rarely are any of these techniques done because the performer can't sing or the guitarist can't actually play. They're rarely used as a crutch and almost always as a way to enhance the performance. And especially in terms of vocals in these bigger productions, it's almost always mostly the live instrument being sung with a mixture of track vocals. And you'll see a couple different types. Firstly, you'll see background vocals, and this is not a surprise to anyone. You'll see these vocals are meant to be under layers of the lead, harmonies and doubles and more reverby, quieter layers that are designed to just enhance and support the lead vocal. Because in the studio, we're pretty used to this huge stack of tracks that really can't be done live unless you have 8 Ariana Grandes with you. And to replicate this live, it's pretty common for these background layers to be fully tracked and have no live element at all. Or if there is a live element, it's often just the guitarist singing the harmony in conjunction with these layers. And since the human mind is really always drawn to that lead vocal part, this is not a difficult one to do well live, and often why you see it very commonly done, and definitely the least sinful of the vocals. Which leads us to the wet effects. So this is basically all the reverb and delays that are supposed to be on your lead vocal. In modern music, there's generally a significant amount of these on the studio tracks, and they need to be replicated live, therefore they're a pretty important part to the song musically. And you'll see with more straightforward rock artists, they often forego this one and just use the front of house sound guy to do all the reverb and delays live, because they don't really need anything super special. In the other cases where there's details and specifics and variety that needs to be done in a way that is often unrealistic or impossible to be handled by the front of house guy. So they can basically split the job, with the sound man handling the live sounding effects, so it could be mixed well to the specific room and have a lot of configurability, while the track spatial effects for the iconic sounds or super specific ones are going to be handled by the tracks. And so similar to the snare reverb, they'll have 100% wet reverb and delay of the lead vocal in their tracks, so they're perfect. And they're tuned and have all the detail and exactly what we want underneath the track. And since it's 100% wet, it really sits underneath the live vocal really easily, and it's pretty seamless and invisible on its own with any professional vocalist. And finally, it's time to talk about the real sins. So here's an uncomfortable reality. The amount of vocal performances we've all seen where we went, whoa, they sound really good, and it was unbeknownst to you a pre-recorded track it's way less than 0. In some ways, vocal tracks are a lot like autotune. It's around us a lot, but when done right, it's completely invisible and we just like it. And similarly, as we said before, you'll find that it really has very little to do with, oh, they can't sing it, and far more to do with a pragmatic decision to prioritize the best performance tonight and the rest of the tour. Though we really need to reiterate that using vocal tracks is really generally not the reason most music fans think it is.
It's because you can't sing.
Which is not completely wrong, but at the professional level, singers are really good at what they do. And if there's a choice to use a track, it's rarely because the vocalist lacks the talent to do it live. And let me be clear, because I'm not advocating for this or saying it's good, I'm just saying it's because it's logistical reality every touring act will need to deal with. And there's varied reasons why it might become a chosen option. It could be musical. There's a specific sound that only can be done in a track, like a super glitchy sound in a part. Or the reason could be physical, meaning it's performatively detrimental based on the physicality of something, or a costume they have to have on a specific song. Or maybe it's just practical. When there's a super high money note, but we have 20 more dates on the show, and we can't burn out the singer on show 3, so some shows they let that track do that money note. But they're all based on really just pragmatic choices and not coping mechanisms to compensate for crappy singers. They're seen as tools to enhance and provide the best performance to the audience. But despite all, what, why, and when would you ever want to have the lead vocal, the most important instrument in the mix, to be a pre-recorded track? So anytime dancing or movement or a crazy stage set piece or costume is involved, or some physical aspects of performance, there's a potential negative impact on the lead vocal. You'll see the seamless switching in a vocal part. Line 1 would be the live microphone, and then line 2 of that same part being a track with the mic muted, and then right back to the live microphone for line 3 of that part. And it being an automated and fluid process, just like a pre-built light show that hits perfectly with each beat. And all this audio is perfectly synchronized. They'll have these vocal mutes as part of the show. And also, there could just be simply sonic reasons for having a vocal track. Because having a slightly glitched or super harshly cut part of a phrase is super common in modern music. And while it takes about 3 seconds to do that in Pro Tools in the studio, it is often inhumanly possible to do live. And so the same premise will apply. You'll have a mixture of where they can choose of what sounds better on a track or sounds better live. And finally, on the rare occasion that you're actually on television or anything live, a lot of those shows will require a mostly or fully tracked performance. And this is not odd to us, because outside of one, basically everything you see at the Super Bowl is 100% backing tracks, because the logistical reality, an extreme tight timeline, and zero possibility for mistake renders itself. Now, something interesting is that while vocals and tracks to whatever degree an act does it is normal. However, it's really essential that the audience doesn't know what's happening. It has to be invisible to work. So whenever fans are vaguely near, I'm talking sound checks and warm-ups, the track vocals are often muted. They'll have everything else playing but those, because it needs to have that suspension of belief. The performance needs to be larger than life. So there's a game that needs to be played, and they need to maintain that magic curtain that hides the details. It's similar to visual effects in a movie. If you start noticing them, they're probably missing the point. Because if you see the guy in the green screen suit moving around, it kind of destroys the whole magic. Personal anecdote here, we did a show with a European band one time. 2 guitars, bass, keyboardist, 2 vocalists, and sonically fantastic. Stage performance, some of the best I'd ever seen. Crowd interaction between songs and parts was professionally and masterfully done. And I think you know where I'm going with this. But after the show, I learned, basically aside from the improv crowd talking and the drums, 100% of it was tracks. Nothing was played, all of it was faked. Now, they were so fantastic, and performance-wise, they were one of the best I really have ever seen. Until I found that out, and it definitely left a sour taste in my mouth. But I only knew that because we were on the show, and I got to see behind the scenes. And I think that's an important thing to understand. To deliver that larger-than-life performance, it needs to be something that actually is larger than life. And to do that well really means finding the right balance of the chaos of the live instrument and the perfect order of pre-recorded elements. And finding that combination of the right way to present it is the path to making the best performances we can. And as an artist, this question will be or has already been put upon you. What is our relationship with technology and art going to be? Because the reality is whatever the modern conventions of the day are littered with technological advancements that were considered cheating. The electric guitar itself was completely frowned upon for that reason, as was using click tracks because people thought it took the expression out of tempo. But the counterpoint here, as an artist, there's a risk you wear every time you venture into over-pragmatism. You risk the soul of the work. And there's no line where this starts and ends, and it's really, as an artist, it's a conversation that you really should try to have with yourself often. But to take the dismissive approach, all tracks and auto-tune and blah 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 is always bad, is a very detrimental approach to both your pragmatic career and, worse, your artistic integrity. These are all tools, and we have a responsibility to remain agnostic to using any approach that creates the best art for our hearts and those who consume it. And yet, on the other side again, always taking the path of convenience and pure pragmatism in your art and performance is quite detrimental to the soul of the work you're creating. So I really hope something in here was useful or at least interesting to you. And if you have any specific questions, please let me know below. And I'd really appreciate the like and subscribe to my channel if you can. So thank you for your ears and your time. I'm BABYWOLF. Go make some art.